Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor of Ultiworld, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me is Ultiworld senior editor Keith Raynor. Good afternoon, everybody. We are doing this with a live audience of sorts today here on our recording platform, which is a lot of fun. And we've got a mailbag episode coming your way. We have a ton of great mailbag questions from listeners, subscribers, and we're going to dive in. I mean, it's sort of atypical to have a mailbag, after a year of not playing Ultimate, but we're going to see what we can do with it. And as we start to, look ahead to the summer and the return of Ultimate, Keith, I have to say, I just heard that I might have like some semblance of Spring League here in the city, which is extremely exciting.
I bet. I know you're itching to play. And can I just say that when you say we have a live audience, I feel like you're doing like live from New York. It's Deep Look podcast. Like we need like the audience clapping and whatnot, but hold up the applause button. But no, it's exciting to hear that you may add Spring League. I mean, I am holding out some slim hope that I will get to play Summer League, although it might be a nice respite from the baby, but we'll see if my wife sees it that way.
I mean, I think you got to at least sign up,
Yeah, and maybe I'd take the baby with me, we'll go hang out, get some sunshine.
Rock on the sideline. Yeah.
Who hasn't had a baby at Summer League before? Like, who has that?
I've seen it many times before. Real quick in the news before we get into the mailbag, congratulations to the winners of the Australian Ultimate Championships. And the AUDL announced its 2021 season schedule. So we have an official schedule now. 12 games for every team. Full season starting June 4th. A lot of games on Friday nights this year, Keith. An interesting development. I'll be really curious to see how those games do, both from like a fans standpoint, if that's even a thing this summer, but also just from like a streaming standpoint. Are people going to tune in more on a Friday night compared to a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon?
I'll be curious to see how the streaming numbers just do in general.
Sure. What's
the appetite like for Ultimate? I mean, I'd be curious to see the Australian Championship streaming numbers. They had this game. I was watching some of the women's game, and to see Ellipsis come back. That's a tough loss to take. To be up 3 goals or whatnot and not be able to hold out. But
we've seen it many times before. Yeah,
and Ellipsis is a powerhouse, global brand. So that's tough to fight against. But had to check it out and root for Holly Reeve, who I fanboy. So I'm curious how their numbers did. I'm curious how the AUDL numbers will look, and if maybe by really pushing to say like, hey, we're doing this in June. And provided that we can do it safely, we're gonna make it happen. I wonder if that will push other organizations to be like, wow, if there's this major organization in Ultimate that's gonna get play started, like maybe we need to get things in gear.
I think it's gonna be very interesting to see how it all plays out. I mean, we haven't.
I know I'm singing your song here.
We haven't heard an update from the Premier Ultimate League since the beginning of March. We know that they weren't planning to play before July 1st. I expect we'll probably get some kind of update soon. The Western Ultimate League is not looking to play until late 2021. I talked to Felicia Yang, the head of the league, and it sounds like it's not clear exactly what that means, but trying to avoid a lot of overlap with the club season. So I don't know if that means they would play games post Nationals or if they would start playing in maybe September. But I think for the most part, maybe we'll see some club starting to happen in June. And because, of course, the season is scheduled to begin in June, even if there's no major, Triple Crown Tour tournaments until July. So I'll be really curious to see, because I think people are still kind of dipping their toe. I can say, at least here in New York, people are starting to play a little bit again. There's more mini happening. There's more pickup happening. I have started playing some, masked mini up here in Inwood. I'm probably going to play this afternoon. And, Gultimate is starting to pick up. So I think we're going to start to see that more and more as people start to get vaccinated and feel more comfortable competing.
Right. And even beyond, the major organizations, the other semi-pro leagues and whatnot. I think that you may see local leagues feeling like, if your local AUDL team is playing or planning their season, maybe that changes how you're looking at your season. Maybe that means that there are people who are asking you like, hey, are we having the season? Like, what's going on? So, these things can have that kind of domino effect.
Right. Well, we've got a lot of mailbag questions to get to, so let's dive in. Keith, you've got the list. Pick one out. Let's get rocking.
All right. Well, since we were talking AUDL, maybe you can shed some light on this because I don't know exactly the answer, but we'll come up with what our theories are. I think O'Reilly from our Discord asks, how will the AUDL's Canadian Cup work? What do you foresee for that, Charlie?
Well, let's see. 3 teams. I think you play at least home and away against each team. So how many games is that? It's just 4 games, right? So do you try to just keep it small like that, or do you go 2 home, 2 away against each team to make it an 8-game little season? I mean, that's kind of a lot of travel, I guess. I think you would at least make a little round robin, and then probably you have some situation where the top 2 teams from the round robin play, whatever it is, play in some sort of championship game, which you make, try to make a spectator event, assuming that that's going to be possible, in let's say September or something like that.
One of the challenges with 3 teams is always how do you come up with a fair format? I mean, it's the same reason that you don't see a lot of 3-team pools in USAU competition is because you can end up with a 1-1 split all the way around, and then you're going to point diff, and nobody really likes to decide that way if they can help it. I could see teams mitigating travel by doing sort of double headers. Maybe you stay in the city for 2 days and you just play back to back, or maybe you're there for 2 days and you play once in the morning and once in the evening or something like that. So there's time between games for a fair amount of rest, but enough compression that you're not straining resources in the schedule, and you're reducing travel, which I imagine is really the key component to that. But it's a little difficult if you have 3 teams just playing 2 games, because now it's like, what happens if all 3 teams end up 1-1? Like, you don't want it to be like, oh, well, this team won by 5 at this game. It just doesn't feel substantive to me.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I think you have to do some kind of like total point differential thing like they do in Champions League soccer, where you play the home and away legs, and then whoever scored more total, like if you each win a game, whoever scored more total goals in their away game wins. Or
what if all 3 teams just plan to be a championship weekend, and if there's a tie, you play some sort of play-in game beforehand or whatnot? You redecide.
Now, see, that's kind of fun. If they brought the top 2 teams, or even all 3, well, let's say you bring the top 2.
And then they could try some of our crazy overtime rules.
You have that as a warm-up game before the final on
But then
Saturday.
One team has to play 2 games in a row. At least one team.
Because it's possible that the border will be open by then.
This is already sounding very unlikely to me. I think we may have broken it, but
reminder, if you're listening live, you can hit us up in the chat, or you can also call in with a question, or if you want to discuss one of these topics with us, so just hit us up and we should get a notification. So this one comes also from the Discord, Keith. Abajkot asks, what's the over-under on the number of teams that made nationals in 2019, club nationals, that won't compete as a team in 2021? Interesting.
I don't think more than a handful. Certainly, I don't think it's 0. So I think I would set that line around 3.5 or 4.5, something like that.
So we're talking about 48 teams that made nationals in 2019. And how many teams in a normal year don't exist after making nationals the previous year? It's non-zero most years.
But is it even 1? Like, is it
right.
1 or more?
On average, it's probably like a half or something
right.
like that. We had High Five disappear. Mm-hmm. We had Ironside disappear. I'm sure that there's other teams that I'm just forgetting because it's been 2 years since we've played Ultimate. But I think if you give me 4.5, I'm going to take the under. Because like to not compete as a team is a high bar. Like that means that people are like, you know what? We just don't even want to exist this year. Like we're done.
Yeah, I could see teams saying, we're not going to compete. Like we're sitting this year out. Like maybe we'll have practices, maybe we'll have events, maybe
does that
we'll
count
do
as competing. Do you have to play at a tournament?
Yeah, I think in order to qualify for what Abashkad's asking, you need to play at a tournament.
That's fair.
Or at least some organized event. If you play some sort of showcase games or whatnot, that works. But I guess potentially. But I'm worried that they're not worried, but I believe there will be teams that say, I could see a team saying, you know what, we're going to dedicate our season to continued equity and social justice actions. Like I could see that happening. And that all it takes is a couple of teams like that and one team to fold and, one team to say we're taking the year off or whatnot. And boom, you've broken the over.
I mean, there's got to be a couple teams at least that decide they just aren't comfortable traveling and then never get comfortable traveling, right?
Now, those teams might play some local events that would say that they competed, but I don't know. Maybe that doesn't meet the definition of compete if you're not even trying to go to nationals.
No, I think if you play a tournament, it counts as the team as it's structured. Because the thing is, the other thing to keep in mind is that the rules this year are so reduced that there's not going to be any effect from, if you don't exist as a team this year, normally that would cause big repercussions for what you could do in the future because of the Triple Crown Tour rules. You can't just disband and create a new team with all of the same team members or many of them because there's rules against that because USA Ultimate basically has put into place systems that don't allow teams to just sort of dissolve randomly and then pop up as a new team. So this year, that stuff is not in place. So there's way less of an incentive to, make sure that you compete and play, even if things are, not good, or you want to break up the team and do something new. So I think that could play into it too. I still take the under on 4.5. I think if you put it at 2.5, I take the over, but.
So maybe the line should be 3.5. Maybe we're close. Maybe 3.5 is a better line. But one team we know is planning to compete. The quotation marks is Revolver, per their recent tweet, San Francisco Revolver from the club men's division, saying that they will plan to, and I stress that it did say, quote, compete, end quote. So I don't know what that means. Maybe they think nobody can compete with them. So it's like, if you want to call playing against this competition, then sure, go ahead. But that's probably not what they intended by that. But
I mean, listen, I'm going to be honest. This is a really weird statement from Revolver. They said, after careful deliberation and reviewing feedback from previous team members, Revolver 2021 leadership have committed to creating a space for the team to, quote, compete during this year. There's a full statement as well. Revolver has always been about creating a space where individuals could push each other and grow both on and off the field. A space where we could lift each other up in the pursuit of growth as players and as human beings. Is this an Ultimate team? Like, what? Let me just continue. As leadership went about soliciting feedback from former players and lead up to this year, it became clear that there was a strong desire to create and maintain that sort of space again. As a result, we have committed to continuing to maintain such a space as we look towards a 2021, quote, season. I know it's a weird year. I know it's going to be a weird season, and there's probably going to be teams that approach it in a lot of different angles. I mean, I think broadly that's what this is going on about, but this is a very odd statement about an Ultimate team, especially one like Revolver that's like has such a legacy of like being incredibly competitive and successful. So I don't really know what to make of this. I guess it means they're playing.
Was this an assignment that had a word requirement or something? Because it just felt like this feels like when you're a college freshman or whatnot, and you're just like rewriting sentences with extra words in them that you don't need. I'm not quite sure as to why this statement is so lengthy, and the prose is so so just like loquacious. I don't know. I'm trying to talk like I would if I were writing this statement. But a really complicated way to say we're holding tryouts and we don't know what the rest of the season holds. Also, we take inclusivity seriously, and we will help people with those resources. That's good. No one is. I don't think either of us have a problem with the message here. I just don't know why they said it in such a roundabout way.
My gut feeling is that a lot of people are worried still about being perceived as kind of returning to play because they don't want to be judged by others for doing so, who might think that that's, inappropriate because of COVID. That's really what I can come up with there.
We live under the thumb of the ultimate social media mob right now.
Anyway, let's go to the next question. I guess Revolver will be competing. We think.
Yes.
They're going to be, quote, competing.
Whatever that means. All right. So another question from Discord. This one comes from Ian. Ian asks, should mixed require the 4 players in the majority gender matching group on the O-line to identify themselves via hand signal before a point so that the D-line can match up without having to rely on visual cues from across the field? He went on thinking about USAU's fours announcement and seeing more talk about alternate rules. Is there something obvious about 7-on-7 that makes sense for it to be the default form of play? So that's a second question. But so dealing with the first question. This feels like an obvious yes. Should teams have to make clear which gender matching players are which on the line so that you can appropriately match up? Yes. Why wouldn't you? Unless we're gonna abandon the gender matching concept at all and just say like it's 7-on-7, you figure it out. Yeah, I think that there's no reason that we should just be like forced into assuming which players are which from across the field. That doesn't feel fair to anybody.
This is an interesting one. In a way, it makes a lot of sense because like it can be difficult to necessarily sort of match up appropriately across the field. But I mean, isn't that sort of true all the time, even in a regular game? Like you don't necessarily know who the cutters and handlers are when you start a game, and we don't ask people to identify. But
your cutters and handlers aren't sorted into like I'm specifically playing with the intent of matching up with this group subset of people.
I guess the question is like, would people be comfortable sort of essentially identifying with kind of like whether they're a man or a woman, or like are male matching, female matching? Like, I don't really know if that's something that people would be cool with. I feel like I'm generally in the sort of mindset of like, if the players in mixed feel like that would be a beneficial change to the division, then they should do it.
I'm open to the idea
that we, you determine whether you're going 4 men, 3 women, or 4 women, 3 men, and we have to signal for that. So then why not take it to the logical conclusion?
Right. For better or worse, if the way the system is set up right now, players have already agreed which matching group they're going to compete as a part of on their mixed rosters. Sure. So signaling that is not a signal of what gender you identify as. It's simply, this is the group of players that I would like to be matched up with. And I think that's the other team doesn't actually even have to follow those recommendations, right? They can match up a person from a male matching group to a female matching group. Like that's totally allowed and happens in mixed currently. So that element is still there. It's simply just like, this was how I signed up. This is the group that I've chosen to be a part of. So I think it's totally reasonable and takes out any guessing work or, the potential problems that could come just from not knowing, from just making assumptions, which I think is part of the problem in general with the complications of gender identity.
Well, I want to follow up on Ian's second question about whether 7-on-7 should be the default, besides the fact that that's what's been done historically. And could there be actually a better number of players on the field? It's a really interesting question. And I actually think this gets to something that is kind of a broader issue, which is that like almost everything, and I guess this is true of a lot of sports, so that's just how it is, but so much of the way that we have kind of set up the rules of the game are because of the conditions of like 1965 and 1970 and the way they decided to do it then. Like fundamentally, there have been not that many changes to the rules, despite the fact, as we literally talked about on the show a couple weeks ago, there's a lot of rule changes that you could make, some of which I think are quite sensible and obvious, and we barely even experiment with changes. So, I think that there's nothing inherent about 7-on-7 that is a perfect fit. I do think you can look at other sports to get a feel, like soccer's 11 players, football's 13 aside, right? So we don't play on as big a field as soccer, and I can't imagine 13s being a good way to play Ultimate. But, going to sixes, as we discussed, that actually might be better. There's a little bit more space. It makes the mixed division make a lot more sense. And it creates more teams potentially because you have smaller rosters. There's a lot of things about sixes that could make sense. And it's the same thing. Like we saw you expand the field in the AUDL, people go to eights. People talk about going to eights because it's like too much field space. I think there's an argument there. I mean, we've barely even tried stuff. So I think it could be really interesting to play different versions of the game. I certainly think playing like fives is tons of fun. And I don't know that I necessarily think sevens is like especially better.
Right. I kind of agree with that. I think that, there's a chance that fours or fives is the best version of Ultimate or the most fun, or that it's equally fun to sevens. A smaller space also would be really helpful, I think, for a lot of people. One of the challenges with Ultimate, one of the hardest resources to find, besides other players, is enough space to compete. So, decreasing the amount of space that you need creates more opportunity to play. More times that you can have more games going on is also a hidden benefit there. But maybe those are the optimal way to play, and we're all just so used to 7-on-7. Now, there are very few sports that I can think of off the top of my head where there has been a major shifting change that has like changed the game. One of the only ones I can think of is the forward pass coming to American football. Like that changed everything about football. But every other sport pretty much builds on the foundation of what's come before it with tweaks along the way, because that's what people prefer. People are not generally into massive changes because at that point, like, what is the game? Ship of Theseus kind of questions, like what are we really doing here? But I think that there's a chance that I'm skeptical that anything bigger than sevens is the best way to play, because while you do have plenty of space, you only have one disc. And that's probably not going to change anytime soon. Although, who knows? Maybe I'm the small-minded one for not realizing that playing with 2 or 3 discs at the same time could, in fact, be better.
Well, I mean, here's another example. Like rugby plays 15s. And by the way, thank you to the chat. For some reason, as much as I watched NFL football, I don't remember this, but it's 11 aside.
It's 11 too. Yeah, I didn't know why you said 13. I wasn't going to
out of nowhere. Rugby's 15 players, but they decided that the game is like kind of not that good in the 15 aside format, and so they made rugby sevens, which is like become way more popular. And listen, I'm not a rugby expert, so someone's probably going to chime in and be like, actually, rugby 15s is still fine. But I know that like television likes the rugby sevens format. Cricket has created a much quicker to play version of the game that doesn't take like 5 days to play. So, codifying some new rule types, I think makes sense. You never know what's going to catch on with.
Yeah. So someone in the chat mentioned how basketball used to be played with a literal basket that didn't have a bottom. Like it took them like 2 years to figure out we should cut the bottom of the basket out so that we don't have to retrieve the ball after every made shot. So yes, that's true that sport did evolve, but not from the modern form that we've really seen it. I also don't know that somebody else mentioned the 3-point line. I don't know that 3-point line is as big a shift as we're talking about with some of these other ones, but
Tommy also asked about the AUDL, what this year is going to be the Atlantic division, a massive 8-team division because the Canadian teams are not there. So they dissolved the East division and they rolled all the other East teams into the Atlantic for this, this season only. So we're certainly going to talk more about the AUDL as we get a little closer to the season. And, you can listen to our Stall 7 podcast, which is going to go into much greater detail than we will on this show, all about the AUDL. But my quick thoughts are that, there's a lot of really good teams in the division, and it's going to be tough sledding to get into the playoffs, even though half the teams are going to get in from the division. Because, you have to, you can't slip up on a road trip and go 0-2. like that will sink your season potentially. So I think you can pencil a couple of the top teams in, New York, probably Raleigh. And then after that, you've got 6 teams fighting for 2 spots, and it's going to be really tough. A lot of it's going to come down to who gets those, couple early season wins while everybody's shaking the rust off.
And a big factor to me will be, what does Boston look like? Is Boston closer to being a team that we need to be considering a lock? Are they closer to the basement? Odds are that they'll be, in the middle with these other teams. But none of these other teams, maybe the Phoenix have had a tougher run than most of these other clubs, but none of these other teams I think have struck me over their tenure as really poor programs. So there's a lot of questions I think about the division, obviously, with 100%. So far out, so little we know about rosters, but it'll be very competitive. And I don't love that we have to have an unbalanced playoff format like that, but you do the best with what you can, and I think it'll at least make for exciting ultimate.
I have to say, as crazy as this is, I think Boston's on the outside looking in.
I think that's very possible.
Many good teams. Like, I'm going to need to see the proof in the pudding from Boston, because Atlanta's they've been getting better, and they just picked up Antoine Davis. I think Tampa's not going to get in. I think
Pittsburgh was good last year.
Pittsburgh's definitely going to be competitive.
If you ask me right now, I'd pick them to finish third, I think.
Pitt, Boston, who wins?
Coin
flip.
I'd have to say, yeah, it's coin flippy. I think I'd probably favor Pittsburgh as of today, but
sure. Yeah, Boston has the new to the league thing going on too, which is,
and as someone who was there for a new to the league team once upon a time, although it was a year in which we all were new to the league, it takes a little getting used to.
Well, anyway, we'll talk more about the AUDL. Let me pull up another question here. Let's see. This one comes from Mags. How likely is it that the fall 2021 college champions will also be the spring 2022 college champions? Mags is the associate editor at Ultiworld. They'll both be weird series, but do any teams stand to do better or comparatively worse in the spring as compared to the fall?
I think it's pretty likely that you'll see repeat it. Not pretty likely, but more likely than it is in the average year over year. It makes sense given the close time period, but I also think that the really established programs are going to have a big head start over everybody else. And so, the teams that the teams that you probably can think of now as being really competitive are probably going to be the same ones in 21 as they are in 22. Your UNC, this is across even both divisions. Your UNCs, your Colorados, the teams that already. The one exception maybe would be Carleton. We don't know what to expect from them, especially we don't know how much of an impact the extra eligibility is going to have, and we know it's probably not going to be favorable for Carleton, which could lead to some differences between 21 and 22 for Carleton's fate in comparison to the rest of the division.
I'm going to throw it out there that no team will double dip and win them both. I don't know that you're favored to do that, but I think it's more favorable than usual is what I was saying. Well, that's probably true, but I think the impact of who's eligible and who's not, who gets to play with 7th years and who doesn't, not just which programs have them, but also which universities allow them. We have a lot of question marks still about what that's going to look like. And I think there's going to be teams that approach it in all kinds of different directions too. There may be teams that kind of just, even quite good teams, who are showing up and just being like, no, we're going to do our best. But other teams are going to take it really seriously and prepare and try to win the championship. Whereas like in the spring, everyone is crossing my fingers. Everyone's going to have a full season. They're going to treat it like a full preparatory experience getting up to the series and try to win the championship. So I think that while the good teams are still going to be good, I do think that there's going to be enough randomness, enough variance in the fall that it's not going to roll so that the same team wins in the fall as the spring.
All right. Well, there's the challenge issue to you, UNC women. We had the Pleiades captains on, and they were certainly gunning for a championship. And there's a lot of reasons to think UNC could pull off the double peak. But I I will also say, I wonder if there will be some teams that kind of are like, you know what, forget this fall thing. We're going to use this as a chance to have the most competitive fall preseason ever. So we'll have, really sharpen the sword by the time we get into the normal spring series. I mean, this is a chance to basically play the best fall competition you've ever seen in the most serious environment possible. So it's like, you know what, we have some 6th and 7th years you're talking about coming back. We're not taking you. You can't come. All right. Then we're going to season our rookies in a really hot stew. And by the end, we're going to have a lot of flavor developed come 2022.
I mean, I agree with you, but I just don't think every team's going to do it that way.
No. But who's going to, I'm waiting for that regional levels team, outside looking in, who's like got just the right team makeup to say like, let's go for it. Let's try and be ready for the upset. All in. I
like it. I would love to see that. That's what I'm saying. There's going to be volatility because of that weirdness.
And then they should run Hex.
Some team we're not thinking about that like has good freshmen, but also has a couple of like total ringers who are 7th years now that get to come back and play. Like they could be good. It
like I said,
expands the options, especially for those big state schools that have a lot of players. It's an interesting situation. All right. So this one comes from Bryce in the Discord. Sometimes we talk about not having big equipment sponsors as one of the things that causes slow growth in the sport. What can we do to change the focus from goods and services to an experience industry? Consider triathlon. They graduate you from local $50 races when you're young up to $1,000 Ironman branded events. Why isn't Masters an entire experience that brings money into the sport and helps generate revenue that can subsidize youth and other targeted USAU programs? What would incentivize more Masters age players instead of fewer to continue playing in Masters events? Less grueling schedules, better accommodations, 4-on-4, destination location tournaments? It's an interesting question.
I feel like this is the first time that I've ever heard this kind of concept of, as Bryce put it, creating an experience industry and comparing it to triathlon. I don't know that there's a ton of, I think there are these, I'm not sure that I can think of a team sport example that quite lines up with that. And maybe that's part of it here. Maybe there's like kind of a, you don't need a whole team to be interested in playing and to be competitive. And when you need teams, you need a lot more people to make things feel interesting and lively, as well as accessible. So I don't know if maybe that's part of the barrier here. Playing Ultimate in really cool places is expensive. Getting there can be really expensive. And those are the kind of barriers I think people are trying not to erect at this time.
Isn't that Bryce's point though? Talking about Masters age players?
Yeah, and in theory, they have a lot more money than the people who are in college.
Exactly.
I get the idea.
I think this is just generally true of team sports. People are going to fade out more so than individual sports. It's just Ultimate's hard on the body. So I think everything that Bryce suggested in terms of Masters, like having fewer tournaments or fewer games in a day, making it in a fun place where you can spend time enjoying the surroundings. Here's one thing. At PAUC, the Pan American Ultimate Championships in 2019, happened in November in Sarasota. They had a 2-game-a-day schedule with most of the whole tournament done by 1 p.m. each day. So you'd show up in the morning, you'd play a game, maybe back-to-back games, or you'd have a round off. They'd have a big catered lunch for all the players, and then you got to spend the rest of the day at the beach. And being there as media, what an incredible schedule. Like, you still go, for us, it's work. For the players, it's competition. You still get all that, but you also get to enjoy being at the wonderful beaches in Sarasota. And, it's not this like grind fest of having to play 3 games a day and all that. So I think that's the kind of thing that could be more appealing to players who are maybe not like ultra competitive trying to win nationals. Here's the thing. I wonder whether or not this is even the right approach. Now, what Bryce says about experience as the kind of industry behind it as opposed to gear, I mean, I think that's already how it works, except we're doing a really bad job of it. I'm actually writing in my subscriber-only business newsletter. I have written most of it. It's going to go out tomorrow morning. And it talks about the cost of tournaments. And I'm talking about just like club tournaments. There is right now a big problem in my view of people underpaying for the tournament experience. Like if you take a team fee and you divide it out by the number of players, people are often paying $20 for a weekend at an Ultimate tournament per person. $20. Think about that. That's nothing. People pay more than that to go to the movies. People pay more than that to do any other sporting event. I promise you. I paid about $50 to play in a one-day disc golf tournament just a couple weeks ago. Totally fine. Had no problem paying it. I think the industry that needs to grow in Ultimate is on the event side. Like we need to actually make it possible for tournament organizers to make money by charging more so that we can have higher quality events, because that is the main mechanism by which people experience the sport outside of league settings in cities. So that, I mean, I get what Bryce is saying, and in a way I agree. I just don't know that like targeting Masters age players who are going to have bad knees and bad hips and bad shoulders is necessarily sort of like the optimal approach to monetizing, when I think that really asking players to pay a reasonable amount of money for all of the amenities and benefits that come with going to a 2-day event tournament, that sort of, we could just make that change and it would make a huge difference in kind of where the sport goes.
I forgot I saw who mentioned the idea, but someone said, you know who makes all the money in Ultimate? All the people we spend all the money traveling with, the airlines, the hotels. Those are the real money makers in Ultimate. So you could, if you have a lot of capital, just start your own Ultimate airline or hotel chain or both. I don't know. But mostly, how do we... one of the ways in which we do this is by making it so you need less of that travel stuff. But the hard part is that the Ultimate's somewhat spread out. So, because so much of our expenses are tied up in travel as is, it makes it hard to increase the other costs because we can't reduce those travel costs unless we change how we do things.
Right. Next question.
Just a thought. But
yeah.
Let's look at our next question. So Jacob in Discord asks, best team, and you can pick your division, that has yet to make nationals. Who's going to be the next to make it for the first time?
Grit, DC, women's division. Team that comes to my mind first.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think, Keith?
It is a very tough question.
I mean, Voodoo is always really good, and I don't think they've ever made nationals.
That's another good one. Trying to think if there are teams that like maybe we're overlooking. Are there teams that have been locked in the Southwest that there's such a logjam of powerhouses at the top of the Southwest that it keeps some teams from making it. That would be the place I'd want to look at. I don't know if there's a team that comes to mind as specifically locked out, though.
Yeah, to me, it's like Grit and Small Batch are the teams in the women's division that stand out to me. In the men's division, the good teams mostly have made it to nationals. I think there's some teams that have gotten a lot better recently that I think you could put in that category, like Smokestack.
Mm-hmm. Reese in the chat mentioned Inception from the men's division, who's famously lost many times in the game ago trying to get to
and
nationals.
They're like a competitive team that just is never quite as good as Bravo and Double Wide.
I mean, this team hasn't existed for very long, but what about Sprout in the men's division?
Yeah, I mean, that's another example of a team that's like super brand new. I mean,
Hmm.
Sprout was basically a Jeff Graham hamstring pull away from upsetting Pony and going to nationals in 2019. So I think, yeah, they feel a little different because they like didn't really play serious events in 2019, and like let's see what they can do this time around. But for sure, like whatever Boston team sort of comes out of this whole Dig Sprout situation is probably going to be, that next team.
I'm trying to think it because we didn't name any mixed teams. I don't know if maybe like
Loxa says Oliver
Loxa,
in the
yeah, is the
chat.
one that came to mind for me.
I mean, they had a great season in 19, and then I think they earned a bid if I remember correctly, and then they didn't end up taking it. But that's a good one. That's a team I could absolutely see making nationals as soon as this year.
Right.
Any Canadian teams come to mind? Somebody asks. Um. Well, there was the Canadian mixed team out of Montreal made it to nationals a couple years ago. General Strike is always solid, but not at the national quality level.
Right. They don't quite feel like they're like right there knocking on the door. They're just been a solid team for a while.
Ottawa, Phoenix, they famously beat Buzz Bullets at Worlds a few years ago. But they're the same thing. They're good, but they're not at the next level. Here's my pick for the next team out of Canada that is going to go to nationals is going to be out of the Nova Scotia area. There's a lot of good ultimate happening up there, and we've seen those teams, like those Halifax teams, getting better and better.
Well, like Salty, Red Circus, those types of squads. I wonder if we'll see a mixed team, maybe in like a World's year, get back into the mix too from Canada.
I think the hard thing is like you just have the two huge population centers in Toronto and Vancouver.
And they couldn't be any further away from one another.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it's like surprising that Montreal doesn't have a better club team, but I guess my sense is that sort of like the top most promising players still end up playing with like Toronto. So I think if Montreal commits to focusing on getting better and better, that they could easily be competitive. Montreal is a huge league scene. There's a lot of top talent in the area, but yeah, I'm going Nova Scotia.
Makes sense to me.
One more question in the chat. When are we going to see a team come out of the thriving Utah scene? That's a great question.
That is another good one. I mean, what last year the women's club team, Elevate, was probably the closest that we've seen from one of these major Utah teams. I mean, it just feels like everything in that state is going up as far as the quality of ultimate. So I don't think we've seen a men's team that felt like they were really close, or even necessarily a mixed team, but like it feels like a thing that is very realistic.
Yeah, I think obviously the youth scene in Utah is tremendous, and that's going to keep pipelining into the club teams, and eventually that's going to pay off. I think the challenge is that people, let's say they go to high school, they grow up in Salt Lake City, you go to high school there, and maybe they go to BYU or University of Utah, and then they move to go somewhere else for work. I mean, it's not like a destination city that much yet. And no hate on Salt Lake. I've actually never been. I've heard great things about it. I wonder if there's enough staying power from all of the people, all of that youth scene to make that become a thing, right? There's a reason that San Francisco, Seattle, Boston, and New York and Atlanta have had like good teams for a long time. And it's because those are sort of destination cities where people move as young professionals to work.
Right. But I will say it's not like you see a lot of these Utah players popping up elsewhere. A few, but not a lot.
Jordan Kerr just signed with San Francisco in the AUDL.
Right, but the Lions don't exist anymore. I don't know that means he's leaving the Utah club scene, so to speak. But maybe it will. Maybe he'll play. Maybe he'll be a commuter for a club team out of California. I don't know.
And let me just San Jose, not San Francisco. I'm sorry to the Spiders. I'm sure I annoyed a bunch of people just now. Okay, let's see. Keith, you want to grab one here?
Sure. So this one comes from Tanner in the Discord. How well do you think each major Ultimate entity handled the time off? Feel free to define handled however you'd like. Did any entity do more or less than you expected?
Wow, that's a really hard question to answer today on April 13th, 2021. I think this question will be easier to assess in 6 months. It's so hard to say because I don't have a lot of insight into what, sort of the internal work has been. And it's not like we can really expect people to have been playing much Ultimate to this point. So, and different organizations are in different circumstances too. Like WIFDIF had to cancel all of its events this year. And I mean, they kind of had to. There was no way that they were going to be able to have Worlds in the Netherlands in July. And like, that just wasn't going to happen. And USA Ultimate completely got its revenue base gutted when nobody signed up for club memberships last year. And they've, been slow to hire back people and they've had people leave. And so, how do you assess what they should be doing right now? I mean, the website got updated. That's been long overdue. I think once, if organizations struggle to get back effectively when that is appropriate and safe to do so, then I think you can start to say, all right, here's who did well and who didn't.
I also think that, like you said, that the nature of the type of work that I think is being done within these organizations, certainly if it's anything like Ultiworld, is a lot of it is internal stuff, infrastructure, processes, like things that are kind of difficult to evaluate from the outside and take time to see the dividends from. I think that the organization that's been the most public about that type of work, obviously, is the Premier Ultimate League, who's doing a lot of work within the organization and very little externally. But it could take some time to see, what grows from those seeds of the work that they're doing within the organization. It may not be something that happens right when they return to play. You may not see a whole different league. It may take time to see what the impact of those decisions is. And at that point, it's going to be, something more that you can evaluate. But it's really difficult to make these evaluations based on what we know and the type of work that's being done.
Yeah. I mean, so much is about like, how have you prepared to come back? And that we haven't come back yet. So I don't know.
Right. And what are you going to say about the Western Ultimate League hasn't even gotten to have a season yet? So
yeah. I mean, a lot of it's just about like, what's the online PR look like? And I think you could like draw up how you would assess different organizations did with that. But it's been a bit of a nightmare for everybody, I think, to some extent, PR wise. All right. I love this one. This one's from Ian. Looking at top teams. So we're talking about like quarterfinalists plus a nationals. All right. Is there more meaningful remaining margin for growth in throwing at an individual level? So like for the best thrower on each team to improve, or for the average skill of the team overall to rise? So asked another way, which is more likely to have an impact on the game in the next 10 years? Good throwers getting even better, or average throwers improving? With maybe, the good throwers staying relatively static. Go ahead, Keith.
Which is more likely to have an impact on the game? Does that mean which do we think is more likely to happen? Or which do we think would have a larger impact should it happen?
I think we can safely assume that average skill will continue to go up over time as like youth and college and coaching continues to improve. So like that is probably going to be happening. And you could probably assume that the best throwers will also get better. So like, which matters more, I guess, is the more interesting question.
I guess maybe it doesn't matter, because I think my answer would be the same, which is average throwers getting better. I think that is one, the more likely thing to happen and at a larger rate. And I think that it also is the thing that'll have a larger impact. When you see a reduction in general turnovers, when you see, more time spent building systems because you don't have to work on basic throwing fundamentals. When you see the level of play, I think one of the delineating factors between really good teams and okay teams is the ability to execute throws across your roster in difficult situations. Being able to get the disc off the line in a tough spot. I think those types of plays are what separate average teams from really elite teams. And, as you see more teams cross that threshold, it pushes the level of competition higher. You start to see better and better, higher level play earlier and earlier in tournaments and in the series. And so I think that in general, the average throwing ability has a larger impact on the game than what you see from the top end throwers.
I find this to be a fascinating question because
it's a great question.
My expectation is that defense is going to continue to improve as well. And we're going to end up in situations where there's quite a bit more switching. There's quite a bit more zony hybrid looks. And we see quite a bit less of chase your mark around the field. We've already seen the progression towards that over the last 10 years, 5 years. But I think that's going to become even more prevalent. And basically what's going to happen, what defenses are going to be trying to do is, instead of saying we want to try to beat you in a foot race on the undercut and lay out DU on an under, is going to be, we want to force you to throw a difficult throw accurately. Because, a straight 20-yard under is an easy throw for most players, even average players. And a 25-yard hammer in windy conditions is not. So defenses are going to try to put more pressure on like throwing lanes and taking away spaces, both in zone looks and matchup looks. And so as a result, throwing quality is going to have to rise to meet that challenge. And so the question is, who's making those throws? Are you going to see the top handler on each team being asked to make those throws? The thing is, are the best throwers today better than the best throwers of 15 years ago? I honestly don't think so. I think some of the greatest throwers of all time played 20 years ago.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Look at those people who were slinging it up in Canada, like on those Furious teams. There were some spectacular throwers, and I don't necessarily feel like you see people today that like just blow you away with their throwing. There's a few players.
Are you sure that those players didn't look so incredible as throwers because they were just so far ahead of the rest of the pack? Like that the average was lower, so they looked much better.
Maybe. But like Crookshank, like you put him in today's game, he's still going to be one of the best handlers, right?
I don't know. I think so. In my memory, Crookshank's one of my favorite players ever. So yes, in my head, yes. But like when I think about it logically, I don't know the answer to that. Like if we put him in today's game, he might look more like a good handler instead of the best thrower in the world or whatnot.
I think the top throwers are going to get more versatile. I think they're going to start to learn to throw more effectively with their offhand, not just a high release backhand, but like literal breaks in multiple ways. In some ways, it's kind of crazy that there's not more players who are practicing like significantly with their offhand, like learning to throw flicks and like generating powerful hucks on both sides. Like there's times if you're in a headwind and you catch the disc in a power position going from left to right on the field and you're throwing straight into the wind, stepping into a forehand is significantly more challenging than stepping into a left-handed backhand. And I think that, being able to throw that throw in sort of that more natural way with a throw that has more spin on it because it's a backhand is going to be a step forward in the game. But all this said, I do think what you said is correct. I think that the average quality of players is probably going to have a bigger impact because already teams do a good job of trying to take away top throwers, people screaming shooter, people trying to, go box and one at times, find ways to get the disc pushed into the hands of weaker throwers where turnovers tend to happen. So if those weaker throwers suddenly get a lot better and they're able to hit those hammers and those blades and those unconventional throws outside of 15 to 20 yards, all of a sudden your defensive scheme breaks down because you're taking away the space and they're able to throw it in over the top. And so I think that ultimately, getting the players on the roster who are currently, even on top club teams, there are bad throwers on teams, like actively bad throwers who, if you saw them throwing at your summer league, you'd be like, man, they can't throw. That will have to change, and players are going to have to rise to a higher level of competence across the board.
Another thing that you mentioned is wind, and I think that also is a place where, as average throwers get better, the game has a pretty big impact. If everybody's able to throw in the wind, like the game's just going to change a bit, and so that's another area where I think you're going to see that impact shown.
All right, let's see. Let's do one more.
I've got a question. Well, there's a quick one I think from the chat. I hope it's quick. From someone who's calling themselves Brody and Marquez. It looks like you just get to name yourself whatever you want in the chat. So Brody and Marquez, I'm going to assume that's referring to Brody Smith and Marquez Brownlee. Charlie and Keith, what song would you choose for your Callahan reel? Are we like a duo in our Callahan reel, or do we each get our own reel?
Let's say we're a duo. As DJ.
Oh, really? I didn't think you were going to make us go that way. I thought
we're going to have to make. Because
DJ Charlie Eisenhood has to have thought about this, right?
I honest to God, I've never thought about it.
Oh my gosh!
I've never thought about it until this moment.
Okay, I know. I think I know my answer. Although there's always songs that are like my workout songs, like my pump up songs at the moment. That like maybe those are songs that I would like. There's a song by the Chemical Brothers called "This Is Not a Game." That I think would be a great song for a reel. There's a lot of T.I. I grew up listening to a lot of T.I. when I was younger. So like Tell 'Em I Said That is a really swaggy song. But I think the song that I've always wanted to see in a reel, and I don't know that I've ever have, is a song by The Bravery called Believe. And yes, I've gone across genres right here. We're in all sorts of different genres. Bravery, not a band that I like love or feel attached to, but that song has always felt like it's made for a highlight reel. So I'm going to go with The Bravery Believe.
I honestly don't even have a good answer for this question.
That would not be a good fit for our duo reel, though. It's a totally different energy with me and Charlie.
Right. Does anything come to mind for you as our combo? Like, what's that? There's been some songs that we've definitely listened to at tournaments that have been like the song of the tournament over the years.
Oh man. There was definitely a Drake song that you're big on I'm a Classic Man. I remember when that was a big thing.
Oh yeah.
I remember that was a song that Charlie just could not stop singing at tournaments.
One that I remember listening to with you in the car is Monster by
Meek Mill.
It was Nicki and
Nicki Minaj, yeah.
And a bunch of people though.
Okay. Yeah, Kanye, maybe that could be it.
Maybe.
All right, what else you got for me?
I don't know. I just don't have a good answer to this question. I'll think about it and try to answer in like a future segment. Okay, Keith, there's a specific question for you.
Oh, I feel so special.
Again from Bryce. I'm going to try to cut it down. It's very long. What are some good uses of game theory? Something that you wrote about in a recent Bring It In, your column on Ultiworld. And so here's some thoughts from Bryce, and then maybe you can respond. It's really expensive to get a break with your universe line against their universe line. So I like to try and get a break during the lulls of the game. So he likes to run a kill line the second D point of the game instead of trying to break into half because they all ultimately count the same. Bryce says I rarely run our offense out of a timeout. It's usually a play to a typically unguarded dead space with a route that's out of our normal flow. And I have a couple of gimmick Ds that I love to run, even if it's just for 1 to 2 throws out of a timeout. Is that worth it? I'll just leave it at those two first.
Okay, so there's a couple different ideas in here, but the last question that Bryce asked is it worth it to have a couple of gimmick defenses to run even just 1 or 2 throws? And I'm a coach who loves to keep the other team off balance the more you make the other team think about various different, eventualities that they can run into, the more I feel like your defense is winning the game. And it can come at a very low cost. However, preparing yourself to run like kind of defenses that you don't even really intend to be incredibly effective feels kind of like a waste of resources. If we were a professionalized sport and you had so many hours of practice and access to your players, then that might be a little bit of a different equation. But given the limited amount that in general we club sports coaches have as time to work with our players and the things that we have to work on. I mean, we talked about the average level of throwers. College coaches in this example are introducing new players to the game all the time. It's kind of, to me, it feels like kind of like you're not getting the real bang for your buck out of it. But I'm a big fan of mixing up the defense just to keep the other team guessing. As far as like good uses of game theory, and this came from something where I talked about timeouts through the framework of game theory. I don't quite know if these are game theory ideas that I've quite put into play yet. But stuff that I've tried and like to do would be, rather than trying to match up my most athletic defender with the best cutter on the other team, I'll sometimes match them up actually with the worst handler on the other team with the idea that like, look, we can get a turnover, but then we're just going to dominate this person on the other side. Or sometimes putting your best offensive player out there on defense and calling like so that you can get them back on offense without the matchups. Sometimes you're playing against a team and you keep putting your best player on the O-line and they have this great stopper or a great defensive scheme for them. But if you put that player out there on defense on a turn, suddenly they're an offensive player and the other team doesn't get quite the same setup to deal with defending that player. So sometimes that kind of stuff I think can be fun. Also a big fan of turnovers in the end zone, picking it up and not walking it to the front of the end zone. You get one of those a game. That trick works usually once. But if you got that wide open huck, just pick it up, take it, take the bomb.
I'll never forget watching UNC Wilmington run a play out of exactly that situation. And I'm going to forget his name now, but they had a guy who could just absolutely cannon a backhand. And he was
Luke Hancock.
I think that's right. I think it was Luke Hancock. Discs in the middle of the end zone, defenders waiting at the goal line. He picks it up, unmarked, full power, hyzer backhand bomb to a cutter that they set up out of like either a wheel play or just off the back of the stack. Easy goal. And like, yeah, 100%. Like you should definitely do that. I mean, you can always call that off if the defender does the right thing and goes to try to cover that situation. But if you're going to have an unmarked huck opportunity where you can throw it exactly how you want, like a pull, you should absolutely take advantage of that.
How many times would you be willing to take the exchange of like, I'll give up 8 yards of distance for an unmarked throw? I mean, I think that's a common trade you would be willing to make if given the opportunity, and absolutely. Boom, there it is in a game. Another great game theory, this is more funny than applicable. But remember when we were in at Pro Flight Finale in California, and I believe it was Chain and Ironside, and they ran Snake in the Grass back-to-back times.
Yeah. And
it was like, there's no way they'll see it coming again. How many times in a row can the teams run it against each other before it's like, okay, now we're planning for it, right? If you run it back at them the third time in a row, there's just no way. They're going to think there's no way. But at the fourth, right, now you're diminishing returns.
I think after 2, it's already pretty big diminishing returns, but it's absolutely brilliant to run it back-to-back times because like everyone's like, oh my God, we just got by the stupid snake in the grass. Like, I can't believe it. And then you let your guard down.
Or you run it back at the team that did it to you. You bring it back around. Like, are they prepared for it or will they never see it coming?
This is reminding me of Trenton Spinks pulling off the snake in the grass in the Atlanta
truly a classic moment.
And Keith was on the call. I mean, everyone should go and watch that clip. It's amazing.
I forgot how tall I say he is, but it's way taller than he is in real life. But
6'10".
Yeah, he's 7'9". It's incredible. But it's a great moment because it could not have worked any better. Like the cutter gets it with big eyes and he's like, oh my gosh, my teammate's wide open. I'm just gonna boost this as far as I can. I mean, I've never seen a snake in the grass work.
I think it was Terrence Mitchell to Justin Allen on Raleigh. Yeah.
And Terrence Mitchell couldn't have looked more excited to have a wide open Justin Allen.
He was power position. It looked like Allen was wide open, and then it was snake in the grass. Yes.
Perfect. Amazing.
I will quickly answer the first thing. I mean, I'm not a coach, but Bryce talked about it being expensive to get a break with, sort of two universe lines out there, and that he tries to get a break the second D point of the game because ultimately it counts the same. I think the value of that, and I've generally been one who believes that top players should play more minutes early in games. Look at the way that NBA teams run their rotations. You're going to have the best players on the court as much as possible, and they're typically going to play both the beginnings and the ends of each half. But you push for a lot of that early part of the game to have your best players on the court. Now, if you go to get the break in the second, the second D point and you get it, the thing about that is that not only does it count the same, but it also increases your optionality later in the game. If you're already up a break or two, then you can make different substitution decisions because now you have the advantage in the game. You have the halftime break, on your side. If you decide that you need to give your players some extra rest, you can do that. Instead of stacking up a D-line right before the half, you can just run a standard rotation D-line out there, and you give that extra rest to your players, plus then the 10 minutes of halftime. So having that optionality, I think, is very beneficial. And I actually think that, Ultimate is still not quite figured out the best way to deal with rotations. I think you tend to see teams finally get there for, semifinals and finals of tournaments. But, how big should rotations be? How many players should actually be in games when it really counts? Like, if you're pretty confident you're going to beat a team, sure, you want to run your entire bench as much as you possibly can. But still, getting that early break means that you have more option to do that later. So I think that people think more about like how important it is to sort of like score that first point in going into halftime or out of halftime. And there's certainly psychological effects there. But I think if you can be more rational about it and say like actually getting two breaks right out of the gate and going up 3-1, like that all of a sudden changes the game strategy very much in your favor and allows you to then potentially give even more rest to your top players.
Absolutely. And line calling is really actually one of my favorite parts of coaching. I love the minutia of tinkering with personnel and trying to outwit the other coach, so to speak, with which players you're putting on and where. I remember when I was coaching at Emory, I think it was Kayla Emmerich who's like, for this tournament, let's just like stack our first two lines in every game. Like, let's try and go out and go up 2-0 in every game and stack those lines. But I think you don't see teams try that enough. We're big into games to 3 at that point, and so it was like we really, really don't want to win the first game to 3, and a great way to do that is to score the first 2 points. So that was like kind of the idea behind it. But I think that you could line stacking is kind of a tricky element because you'd love to be able to catch your opponent when they have a weaker line on and be able to crush, I guess. But maybe not. Maybe I don't know. There's a lot of ways to look at it, and it's a lot of fun to toy around with.
Absolutely. I think that is going to do it for this section of the show. Definitely join us for our subscriber bonus segment. We're going to answer a couple more mailbag questions. And just want to say thank you to everybody who tuned in live and hit us up in the chat. Another time, we'll have to have some people do the call-in. Get your courage up, come on the show, hit that call-in button, and jump in with us. So we're planning to do a full listener guest show at some point soon. So we're going to set some of that up. If you're interested in coming on the show to talk about a topic, whatever it may be, hit us up at DeepLookPod on Twitter, deeplook@ultiworld.com. Subscriber bonus segment will be available, of course, to all of the subscribers. If you're a full or a plus subscriber, you also get access to our UltiWorld Discord, a great place to talk Ultimate and where so many of today's great questions came from. So thank you to everybody who sent in your mailbag questions. For Keith Raynor, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week right here on Deep Look.